All right. Well, hello and welcome everyone. Tonight is hopefully December 20th, 2023. And tonight's topic is the parable of the conjured city. No, that's good. That's where we want to be. So something exciting is coming. Tomorrow, it's the winter solstice, which we've been getting ready for all year. So tomorrow, and there's a little bit of disagreement at the times, but tomorrow at 3:28 or 27 a.m. Universal Standard Time, which will be 10:28 p.m. or 27 our time, the North Pole will reach its maximum tilt away from the sun, resulting in the shortest day of the year. So on the slide, I have this picture, and this is from the inside of the site at Newgrange in Ireland. And this site dates back to roughly 3200 BCE. And this makes it older than Stonehenge and the pyramid. And it's sort of interesting, right? This picture was taken on the dawn of the day of the winter solstice. And once a year on the winter solstice, there's a hole at the front of Newgrange, and the sun lines up perfectly when it rises to illuminate this room that the picture is taken from, which is back inside of the structure. And they're not sure what the purpose of this was. Just that interestingly, this is the only time of the year when it lines up this way. So it's believed to have some sort of significance, the observation of the winter solstice. Now looking more toward contemporary times, many observations observances focus on bringing light into the world during its darkest days through things like lighting candles, celebrations, music, and dance. And we can think of many examples, too many to list. Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Yule, Christmas, Toji in Japan, Yalda Night, Shalako, Soil, the list goes on and on and on. I just got those from National Geographic. It's a time that symbolizes rebirth, and it's the beginning of the return of light to the world, and the beginning of a new cycle, and the ability of human beings also to carry on in times of hardship. And the symbolism brings, at least to me, to mind the famous phrase, right, that it's always darkest before the dawn. And looking this phrase up, I found out that it was possibly coined by Thomas Fuller, who was writing a book in the year 1650 about the sites of the Holy Land, called A Pisgah Site of Palestine and the Confines Thereof, with the history of the Old and New Testament acted thereon. Catchy title, yes. In which he was writing about sites of the Holy Land and the sort of parts of biblical history that were relevant to them. And in context, he was actually describing an incident from the Old Testament of the Bible in which King David takes refuge in God from the people of Ziklag who wanted to stone him to death. There's obviously a lot of more context to this story, but in the context of his work, Fuller wrote in response to this, "Thus, as it is always darkest just before the day dawneth, so God useth to visit his servants with greatest afflictions when he intendeth their speedy advancement." In this context, darkness is a metaphor for afflictions, which he presents as a necessary ingredient to move forward. And this sentiment may remind us of the Buddhist image of the lotus flower, which symbolizes awakening brought about by the mud of our afflictions and delusions. And you can tell me now that Thomas Fuller isn't a secret Buddhist. I don't think that he was. But the other possible origin of this phrase is that he actually took it from sort of an Irish saying. It's traditional. Probably got it at Newgrange. Winter is also a time for hibernation, and another name for the winter solstice is the hibernal solstice. Hibernal meaning winter, and it lends its meaning to the term hibernation. So around the winter time, many animals retreat to their well-stocked dens for a semi-hibernation period or go into a deeper state of dormancy where things happen like their metabolic process is slow. But humans also retreat indoors, having prepared for the winter months by gathering supplies like firewood to be able to take refuge in their own dwellings. Humans are social animals, and winter can be a time of loneliness when we want to stay home and not really go out into the cold. What's known as cuffing season is a recently recognized human winter phenomenon in which people begin short-term romantic relationships that last throughout the winter months and typically end around March, shortly after Valentine's Day. All this is to say, human beings are a part of nature, and so we need to recognize the natural tides occurring in ourselves. We're part of nature and not something that's separate from it. And while this intuition is de-emphasized in general in popular culture, it's still expressed through our winter traditions as the rituals that we observe, and we still unconsciously engage in seasonally conditioned ways. And there are numerous examples of this, but what's known as seasonal affective disorder, for instance, is a salient one, in which people experience a 4 to 5 month-ish period of depression during the winter months that ends at the onset of spring. This often manifests as social withdrawal, anxiety, difficulty thinking, excessive sleeping, weight gain, etc. And this is all to say that we need to learn how to recognize these natural tides shifting within ourselves because they're an important and fundamental part of living as a human being in the world. So all of this brings us to a question that our winter traditions address through their rituals, even if we're sort of separated from them in many ways, which is how do we face situations in which all hope feels lost when the longest night of the year arrives? Now, I know it's a newly established Christmas tradition in the United States to debate whether Die Hard is a Christmas movie or not, and I'm going to avoid that discussion because we all know the correct answer. So instead, I would like to present a story from the Lotus Sutra that I believe is a secret winter solstice story, and this is the parable of the Conjured City. The parable itself is a small section at the end of the 7th chapter of the Lotus Sutra. But the chapter as a whole tells the story of the return of light not only to one world, but to the entire universe, and touches on recognizing our human limitations as a condition for awakening. So, plug that in.
Yeah. That would help.
So, the story so far. By chapter 7 of the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha, who is the historical Buddha, is teaching the Lotus Sutra from the top of Vulture Peak, and he's just finished predicting that his closest disciples and 500 members of the assembly will eventually become Buddhas. And after these predictions, he tells a story to explain the karmic connection between the members of the assembly then and himself to demonstrate their connections to each other since the far distant past. Now, in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha uses 3 methods of instruction: teaching by theory, which is just giving the teaching by parable, we're going to look at a parable, and teaching by causal connections, which is maybe the most confusing. But this is when the Buddha tells stories about the past lives of members of the assembly to sort of recontextualize our present view of them. So this chapter actually uses all 3. We're mostly just going to look at the last 2, though. So, the story begins with the Buddha Universal Surpassing Wisdom, that's his name, in a world called Well Realized, during an era called Great Attributes, which, as Shakyamuni Buddha lets us know, is a long, long time ago. And the Lotus Sutra loves to play with notions of space and time and sort of collapse and extend them. So, first, we have to imagine this. There's a 3,000 great thousand-fold world. Sanskrit is Tri Sahasra Mahatahasra Lokadayu. Easy enough. So, if you start glossing this, you basically get something like 3,000 great thousand world system. Hence, we get the translation 3,000 great thousand-fold world. Now, you're probably wondering what this means. Well, Buddhist scholars don't agree. So it could be 1,000 cubed, which would give you a billion, or it could be 3,000 times 1,000, meaning 3 million. Whichever number you pick, we'll just pick 3 million, it's smaller. What this means is that you could imagine something, a collection of planets where there are 3,000 planets, and each one of those has its own moon and its own solar system and all of these things. It's huge. Mikio Nawano, ever the pragmatist and author of the Lotus Sutra Commentary Buddhism for Today, says, just imagine a galaxy. Get you there. So if you have this image in mind, Now imagine there's a person who's strong enough to crush all of those planets into dust, and he smashes them all down and makes them into ink. And then he starts traveling through space. He goes 1,000 planets, and then he puts one drop of the ink, and then keeps going 1,000 more, puts another drop of the ink, until he uses up all the ink that he made from crushing this entire giant universe. Then he takes all of those worlds, the ones that he passed through and the ones that he dropped the ink in, matches all of those up too. And then you take all of those grains of dust, and each one of those represents a kalpa, which is, again, there's some disagreement about exactly how long that is, but we could say like something like an eon or like an era, right? Like a long period of time. That's how far in the past this Buddha lived.
Did I see this on Doctor Who?
We're pretty much in that same realm at the moment. So this is the setting. This is how far in the past we are. But keep in mind, this is about the people who are on Vulture Peak listing the Lotus Sutra. So the Buddha universal surpassing wisdom was extremely close to realizing Buddhahood. He had defeated the armies of Mara sitting under the Bodhi tree, but still the Dharma had eluded him. And after sitting with a completely still mind for 10 eons, heavenly beings appeared from Triatrimsha, which is one of the heavens, and prepared a lion seat many miles high in the air for him to sit on, but it's still under the Bodhi tree. And when he takes the seat, they start raining flower petals down on him from the heavens. And as the seasons change, the old withered flowers blow away and new ones continue to fall. 4 heavenly kings come down and they start beating drums, and there are others playing music. And they do this for an additional 10 eons with the Buddha sitting under this tree on the giant throne. And universal surpassing wisdom finally experiences supreme perfect awakening, and he becomes a Buddha. And when this happens, his 16 sons that he had before he became a religious renunciate, who are all wealthy princes, put aside all of their expensive toys, hearing that their dad finally has become a Buddha. And they want to go see him. So they go with their grandfather, who is a powerful, what they call a wheel-rolling sage king. And he brings 100 government ministers and 100,000 million of the people from his kingdom to go see this new Buddha. The group places their palms together in gacho, like we do, and they circumambulate the Buddha, praising him in a series of verses, and then they ask him to teach them what he's learned, to roll the wheel of the Dharma for all other living beings. This is spectacular enough, but it isn't even half of it. So when universal surpassing wisdom awakened, it was sort of like an alarm bell for the universe. The sutra says that when the Buddha universal surpassing wisdom attained supreme perfect awakening, 500,000 million Buddha worlds in all 10 directions shook in the 6 ways. The dark spaces between the many domains in each, where even the bright lights of the sun and moon could not reach, were greatly illuminated. All the living beings therein could see each other and exclaim in unison, "Where have all these living beings suddenly come from?" One of the things that's interesting about this image is that the sutra specifies that light can even be found in places where light shouldn't be. It's like the whole universe is lighting up from the inside, as opposed to it coming from an external source. Even the palaces of the Brahma heavenly kings, who are some of the highest heavenly beings. In Buddhism for Today, which is a sort of contemporary commentary on the Lotus Sutra, the author writes about the significance of this light in a subsection that he calls Emancipation from the Hell of Isolation. Now that is a catchy title. And he says, this is a quote, "In places where the teachings of the Buddhas do not circulate, living beings become antagonistic toward one another, and they're unable to open their hearts to each other. Parents and children or brothers and sisters live together in name only. Their hearts are actually isolated from one another. They endure lonely lives in which they have no one to depend on except themselves. Once the teachings of the Buddhas spread in those places, however, people become close friends and the relationship of siblings becomes harmonious. Formerly isolated and lonely people immediately become happy and surrounded by many good friends. This is the significance of the sudden ability of the living beings in the realms of darkness to see multitudes of other beings all around them." So anyway, the Brahma heavenly kings, seeing this amazing light, 500,000 million Brahma heavenly kings in the eastern direction wonder where it's coming from. And they say, never has such a brilliant light lit up all of our palaces. What could be the cause? Let us investigate it together. Perhaps the birth of a heavenly being of great virtue or the appearance of a Buddha in the world makes such great brilliant light shine forth everywhere throughout the universe. So, all 500,000 million Brahma kings fill baskets up with heavenly flowers from the domains they inhabit, and they fly west in their palaces to go find the Buddha. And when they arrive, they find the Buddha universal surpassing wisdom seated on this lion throne, surrounded by his sons and all their ministers, the heavenly kings, the dragon kings, Gandharvas, Kindaras, Maharajas, humans and non-human beings, everyone's there. They arrive just as his sons are asking him to roll the Dharma wheel to teach them. The Brahma heavenly kings bow at the Buddha's feet and then circumambulate him hundreds of thousands of times, sprinkling the heavenly flowers as an offering to the Buddha and the Bodhi tree until the pile is as large as a mountain. They even offer him their palaces, saying, "A world-honored one is very rare and extremely difficult to encounter. Endowed with innumerable merits, he can liberate and protect all. The great teacher of heavenly beings and humans, he shows all the world his heartfelt sympathy. All living beings in the universe equally receive benefit from him. We have come here from 500,000 million domains, leaving the joy of deep meditation in order to pay homage to the Buddha. As we received blessings in former lifetimes, our palaces are magnificently adorned. Now we offer them to the world-honored one and hope he will see fit to accept them." And then after offering their palaces, they also ask the Buddha to roll the Dharma wheel to liberate all living beings, saying, "World hero, most honored of all beings, please expound the Dharma. Please exercise your powers of great compassion and liberate living beings from suffering." So, the Buddha universal surpassing wisdom agrees to teach. But this also isn't even half of it. The same thing happens for all of the 10 directions, which is the cardinal directions, the intermediate directions, below and above. And in each of these domains, 500,000 million Brahma kings have the same reaction. So eventually, they all come to visit, make their speeches, make offerings, and praise him in verse, and then ask him to teach. And these speeches have some common elements. So, in acknowledging the surge of light in their world systems, the Brahma heavenly kings emphasize that they've never seen anything like it before, that their kingdoms are illuminated to twice their normal brightness, and having never seen anything like this before, they surmise that an extremely powerful heavenly being has been born, or someone has awakened to Buddhahood. And in each case, they choose to find the source of the light and bring gifts of flowers and palaces. And additionally, each group recites verses of praise, emphasizing the rarity of encountering the Buddha, how hopeless the beings of these many worlds felt with living beings going on about their lives, increasing suffering through their short-sightedness, and through only focusing on themselves and having narrow perspectives of the consequences of their actions. Finally, each group asks the Buddha to teach them what he's learned, not out of their own desire to hear the teachings, which is very important, but out of compassion for all living beings living in the various worlds. And I think the opening and closing speeches of this section are worth looking into in slightly more detail. These would be the speeches of the 16 sons of the Buddha Universal Surpassing Wisdom, and then the speech of the Brahma Heavenly Kings of the Zenith, or upward direction, who both use the metaphor of light and darkness to convey the sense of hope regained by the presence of a Buddha in the world. From the 16 sons, they say, living beings are in constant suffering and distress, unseeing, in the dark, and without a guide. They do not know the way to end suffering or even know to seek emancipation. Throughout the long night, they have increased the ranks on the paths of evil and diminished the heavenly multitudes. They've passed from darkness into darkness, the very word Buddha long unheard. Now that the Buddha has attained the supreme tranquility of the undefiled Dharma, we as well as heavenly beings and humans gain the greatest benefit. Therefore, we all bow our heads and dedicate our lives to this most highly honored one. Then additionally, from the Brahma Heavenly Kings, their speech sort of ends this section. Before the appearance of the world-honored one, darkness always reigned throughout the 10 directions. The 3 evil paths were thriving and the asuras were flourishing. While the host of heavenly beings dwindled, and many fell into evil paths after their demise. And this section goes on for a moment, but paraphrasing it, these beings had eventually all lost sort of all sense of joy because of the weight of the accumulated unwholesome actions that they had taken throughout all of this time. And they didn't really have any insight into how to get out of that cycle. So they just kind of keep compounding things and making their lives worse through generation after generation. And then the speech continues. The Buddha, who serves as the eyes of the world, appears only once in an eternity. And the reason he appears in the world is that he has heartfelt sympathy for living beings. Rising above the world, he achieved perfect awakening. And so we rejoice and are glad, and all other beings experience extraordinary joy. We now offer all of our palaces, blessed by this light that adorns them, to the world-honored one. Out of compassion, please see fit to accept them. And then one of the most important things that they can possibly do, they say, may these merits extend universally to all, so that we and all living beings together accomplish the Buddha way. In other words, they dedicate the merit of the offerings that they're making to the Buddha to other people. They don't want the benefit for themselves. After all the Brahma heavenly kings arrive and ask him to teach, the Buddha universal surpassing wisdom explains the Four Noble Truths and dependent origination, which are two sort of fundamental teachings. And he keeps teaching to everyone in the crowd until they all become Shravakas, or disciples of high attainment. At this point, his 16 sons ask him to teach everyone how to become Buddhas. And so, the Buddha Universal Surpassing Wisdom teaches them the Lotus Sutra. The 16 sons recite it until they memorize it, but the Buddha keeps reciting it for 80,000 kalpas, or eons, in a row. And once he's finished reciting the Lotus Sutra, he enters a deep state of meditation, and his 16 sons, who have now become bodhisattvas, continue reciting the Lotus Sutra in his place. All the while, more and more living beings join the assembly and continue to become bodhisattvas. And finally, after 84,000 kalpas in meditation, the Buddha Universal Surpassing Wisdom emerges from samadhi, and he sees what the 16 bodhisattva sons have done. And because of their commitment to the Dharma and continuing to teach the Lotus Sutra, he advises the members of the assembly to stay with those bodhisattvas in lifetime after lifetime. At this point, Shakyamuni Buddha reveals that this has been the case up to the present time of his teaching of the Lotus Sutra. This same assembly has been born together in lifetime after lifetime since this far distant past. He is one of the 16 bodhisattvas, and the assembly with him on Vulture Peak have been with him since the time of the Buddha Universal Surpassing Wisdom. In fact, all of those 16 bodhisattva sons became Buddhas, including of the ones that we know Amitabha, or Amida in the West, being one of them. As the time passes from one generation to the next, more and more people from the assembly become Shravakas and eventually become bodhisattvas, and they keep vowing to be reborn together. Now returning to the present time of the story when Shakyamuni Buddha is speaking. Shakyamuni Buddha knows that the assembly is ready to hear the Lotus Sutra again as he's preparing for the end of his life, which is the occasion of him teaching it now. And Shakyamuni Buddha closes this chapter with the parable proper, the parable of the conjured city. And by way of introduction, he says, monks, you should know that the Tathagata's skillful means reach into the depths of the natures of living beings. He knows that they crave and enjoy lesser teachings, and they are deeply attached to the 5 desires. Therefore, for their sake, he teaches nirvana. Those people who hear it will believe in and accept it. So, the parable itself. Imagine that there is a group of people who have heard of a place where rare treasures are kept. And it lies at the end of a really bad road, which we're told is steep and perilous in the sutra. Now, these travelers are lucky. They have a guide who is wise and astute, who knows the safe ways to pass the road, and he agrees to help them. So everything's going all right. The going is rough. And then when they're close to the middle of their journey, members of the group decide that they want to turn back. They get the guide's attention and they tell him they're tired and afraid, and that the road ahead is just too long. But the guide knows how great the treasures are at the end of the road, and he thinks it would be a shame for them to turn back after coming so far. So he uses the power of skillful means to make a city appear further up the road. The guide points out that city to the group of travelers and tells them that they can rest there and that they will find peace and comfort in this city. Basically, there's no pressure to continue this long, arduous journey. The guide says that when they feel ready, he's still willing to help them complete the journey. So the travelers go into the city and they rest and they enjoy themselves. It's a great place. There's all kinds of stuff to do there. And the city really does bring them a sense of comfort and peace, like the guide told them it would. So once the guide sees everyone's rested, makes the city disappear. Ooh. Then he tells them that it's time to finish their journey to the treasures and reveals to them that he conjured the city so that they would take the opportunity to rest and continue on the journey. That's the end of the parable. But in the context of the sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha clarifies the meaning of the parable, saying that the guide represents the Buddhas, or himself in this case, and this road is the path to Buddhahood. Because becoming a Buddha is such a daunting task, Shakyamuni Buddha created conjured cities to provide comfort and peace. The teachings based on faith, like doctrinal teachings like the Four Noble Truths, etc., and also the teachings based on direct experience, like observing dependent origination. Using these techniques to prepare the assembly, he now teaches them the Lotus Sutra, which reveals the real treasure, which is that they have had Buddha nature the entire time. And the members of the assembly have now been able to return to the road as bodhisattvas determined to finish their journey. And it's worth mentioning that the idea of the conjured city, or a place of peace and comfort, is sort of a motif within the sutra. After the introduction of this parable, a stupa, or a reliquary for the remains of a Buddha, emerges from the earth, and there's a Buddha inside it who's still alive, the Buddha Abundant Treasures, or Prabhutarana. And he invites Shakyamuni Buddha to get inside the stupa with him. And sitting side by side on a bench inside the stupa, which is floating in the sky, Shakyamuni Buddha lifts the entire assembly on Vulture Peak into the air and continues teaching the Lotus Sutra, before finally returning them all to the ground at the end of the sutra, again preparing them to return to the world from this safe heavenly place above the ground. Likewise, within the first half of the sutra, chapter 7 itself is when Shakyamuni Buddha takes a pause in the events of the sutra so far and tells a story to let the audience catch up to the fact that they have Buddha nature, which is shocking to them, that they're actually all bodhisattvas, which they didn't think they were, that he's nearing the end of his life, which is huge because it's going to change everything that they've been doing up until now. Now everything is going to be their responsibility. And also that they're all going to succeed in their own journeys to become Buddhas. He's telling them all over the course of the sutra so far that this is going to happen, that it's assured to happen. Then stepping even a further layer back, the Lotus Sutra itself is a conjured city full of amazing imagery that blurs our understanding of time and space, our relationships to the past and the future, our relationship to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and our ultimate responsibility to awaken the entire world, the entire planet Earth, so that it experiences itself as a purified Buddha land. When we close the sutra, we're back on a steep and perilous road again, doing tiring and scary things. But we've received the peace and comfort that we need to continue. So, a central theme in this chapter is the return of light to an eons-long night. And that return is conditioned by the human need for peace and comfort during times of hardship. The Buddha, universal surpassing wisdom, has faced the onslaught of Mara when we join him, and he's won that. He's won this spiritual battle, but still can't fully awaken until heavenly beings bring him peace and comfort by offering flowers, building a seat for the Buddha to sit on, and playing heavenly music for him. That Buddha's awakening, in turn, lights up the entire universe. Beings are drawn to the light and feel a sense of hope and community with all other living beings. They resolve to bring light to the world in the future, to share the treasure of Buddha nature with everyone. In times of hardship, we have the light of our Buddha nature, which is always there, and the peace and comfort of conjured cities, the practices and teachings of Buddhism. The key to making the journey to Buddhahood is understanding, like the wise guide, when we need to rest and when we need to move forward. And one of the ways that we do this is through community, like the Sangha, where we can look out for each other. When I was at the Oklahoma Dharma Center before I moved to New York, whenever Sangha members talk about having difficulty maintaining their Buddhist practice, we used to say that they just needed some time in the conjured city. As human beings, our routines and lives ebb and flow under the influences of many things happening on scales so large, it's hard for us to influence them individually. There are the seasons themselves, which we've talked about some tonight, but also changing economies, technologies, wars, environmental devastation, and ideologies that bring out some of our worst instincts. Considering these towering forces acting on our lives, each of us needs our conjured cities from time to time to be able to keep moving. These are the times when we gather together, shining a light into the 10 directions, into all of these Buddha realms. When we step into the Hondo during the weekly service, prostrate to the Buddhas of the 10 directions, make offerings, recite the Heart Sutra, meditate, and share our joys and concerns, we're stepping into a conjured city, a place where we sit among the Buddhas in peace and comfort. But we're also sharing the light of our Buddha nature with the rest of the world. And then at the end of the service, we return to the world with a new light, and the days begin to get longer. Even the moments where we take a short pause to touch a mala bead or the beads of Juzu, or you have one on your wrist, or even just think of Amida Buddha and recite Nembutsu. These are also conjured cities, created and maintained by Buddhists throughout generations, and available to anyone who chooses to visit them. They bring us the peace and comfort necessary to continue our journey through life and toward eventual Buddhahood. During this time of the year, when we experience the longest night, we gather in our conjured city and uncover the light of Buddha nature to share with the world. Great Master Saicho, the founder of the Tendai school, said that a person who lights up a corner of their nation is that nation's true treasure, which is where we get the phrase light your corner in Tendai Buddhism. So let's keep the spirit of the winter solstice with us throughout the year to keep our corner lit so others can see that they are not alone. Questions, comments, or thoughts? And first, I would like to ask if Ichishima Sensei has anything that he would like to add.
Thank you. I think this parable, Conjured City, is very important for a Buddhist who seeks a Dharma. Yeah, there is a long way to go, but we should have kind of such a magic city to take a rest, spiritual rest. I think this kind of thing is very important. I think this is one of the seven parables in the Lotus Sutra. Each parables really give us very encouraging stories. So thank you very much giving up such a time of thinking Conjured City. Just my comment. Thank you.
I think that the Conjured City is, as Ichishima Sensei mentioned, is one of the 7 parables in the Lotus Sutra, and people often ask, why is the Lotus Sutra so popular in Asia? Why did it become so popular? It became really that and the Heart Sutra are 2 of the most dominant sutras, and not in every school, but in many schools. And part of it is that we think about the extraordinary imagery that you saw in there, the 50,000 individuals, the bodhisattvas flying around, playing the biwa, doing all those sorts of things. And we have to remember that was before Steven Spielberg. That was sort of the literary Steven Spielberg of the day. And we shouldn't discount that, because that's, especially in a pre-literate age, that's what kept people going. That's what kept people interested and maintained their sense of not just devotion, but a sense of continuity between their tradition, their own tradition, and their daily lives. And so the parables, I think, are really powerful, not only in the message they have, which you dealt with very well, but also in the imagery that's used. and we shouldn't discount that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's something that's difficult is you really want to take time to go through some of the imagery in the sutra, but a lot of it is mind-boggling enough that it's not only very hard to describe. We would also take the first 15 minutes of the presentation trying to explain what we were looking at from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
So I just picked this one image, but there are many even in this chapter that are very sort of huge.